It was just another day on the front line for Sergeant Ethan Carter. He had seen his fair share of battles, his fair share of bloodshed, but this one felt different. The air was thick with tension, and the ground beneath his boots felt more uncertain than usual. Ethan could feel it in his gut, the kind of feeling you get when you know something big is about to happen. He had been in the military long enough to trust his instincts, even when nothing seemed off on the surface. Ethan stood near a large metal crate, his rifle resting in his hands, eyes scanning the horizon. The war had been dragging on for years, a relentless conflict over land and power. But lately, something strange had been happening. Strange reports were coming in, strange sightings from both sides of the battle. Some soldiers spoke of mysterious lights in the sky, others of strange vehicles that moved at impossible speeds, but no one could confirm what was really going on. Everyone just assumed it was a hoax or some kind of trick meant to confuse the enemy. Ethan didn't have time for rumors. He had a job to do. His unit had been sent to secure an old industrial complex on the outskirts of a decimated city. It was supposed to be a simple mission: clear out the enemy, hold the position, and await further orders. But the place was eerily quiet. There were no enemy forces in sight, no sounds of gunfire or shouting. It was as if the world had forgotten that this was a battlefield. "Keep your eyes open, Carter," came the voice of his commanding officer, Captain Reynolds, over the comms. "This could be a trap. Don't get comfortable." "Roger that, Captain," Ethan responded, his voice steady. He was used to the silence, the waiting. It was the calm before the storm. Just then, a low hum filled the air. At first, Ethan thought it was just his imagination, but the sound grew louder, unmistakable. It was like a low, pulsing vibration in the ground beneath his boots. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He looked around, trying to pinpoint the source. "Do you hear that?" Ethan asked, speaking into his comms again. "Yeah, we hear it too," came Captain Reynolds' voice. "Stay alert. It might be our target." The hum grew louder and louder until it felt like it was vibrating through his bones. Suddenly, the ground shook, and a strange, glowing object appeared in the sky, hovering far above the city. It wasn't a plane, and it certainly wasn't a drone. The shape was unlike anything Ethan had ever seen, smooth, sleek, and pulsating with an otherworldly glow. It seemed to be floating effortlessly, as if gravity itself didn't affect it. "Take cover," Captain Reynolds barked. Ethan dove behind the nearest wall, heart racing. His mind was spinning. What was that thing? It didn't look like anything the enemy used. He was no expert on alien technology, but he had seen enough weird stuff to know that this wasn't normal. The object hovered for a moment before slowly descending. It landed with a soft thud, almost gently, on the ground near the complex. The strange hum stopped. "Hold your fire," Captain Reynolds ordered. "We don't know what this is yet." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. Was this some kind of new weapon? Maybe an enemy experiment. Or, he thought suddenly, was it something else entirely? Moments later, the hatch on the strange craft opened with a quiet hiss. Ethan's grip tightened on his rifle. His pulse quickened. From within the ship, a figure emerged. At first, Ethan thought it was just a soldier, maybe an enemy scout. But as the figure stepped into the light, he realized this wasn't any ordinary soldier. The figure was tall, maybe 6 feet 2 inches, wearing a sleek, dark uniform that shimmered in the sunlight. The helmet was unlike any he had ever seen, round, smooth, with no visible faceplate. The uniform's material looked advanced, like nothing human technology could produce. It was like looking at a living, breathing piece of advanced technology. But it wasn't the suit that caught Ethan's attention. It was the figure itself. The being's skin was a pale blue, almost translucent. Its features were delicate but clearly non-human. It had large eyes, no pupils, just dark black orbs that seemed to take in everything. There was an air of elegance about it, a grace that Ethan had never seen in any soldier, human or otherwise. But what really caught him off guard was the way it moved, like it didn't quite belong to this world, as if it was more fluid than solid. The figure stepped forward, and Ethan instinctively raised his rifle, his finger on the trigger. But before he could take aim, a voice rang out, clear, calm, and somehow soothing, even through the comms. "Do not shoot." The voice wasn't what he expected. It wasn't robotic or harsh, like some enemy machine. It was soft, melodic, and strangely human. But it was definitely not human. "Who are you?" Ethan demanded, trying to sound braver than he felt. His hand trembled. The being's head tilted slightly, as if considering the question. "I am someone who needs your protection," it said, its voice unwavering. There was a pause, and then it added, "Please, lower your weapon." Ethan blinked. Protection? From what? And why would this thing need his protection? It didn't make any sense. His mind raced, but his instincts told him that this being wasn't a threat. At least not yet. Something about the way it spoke, the way it looked at him, made him hesitate. "Who are you really?" he asked, his voice shaky now. He had been trained for combat, but nothing in his training had prepared him for this. A part of him wanted to run. Another part, maybe the part that still believed in doing what was right, wanted to listen. The being stepped closer, and Ethan didn't move. There was a calmness in its presence, something he couldn't explain. It felt familiar, like it had been waiting for him. "I am Princess Lyra of the Kaldar," the being said, its voice suddenly more serious, "and I am not from this world." Ethan's eyes widened. "Princess," he repeated. From where? You're not one of them, are you?" "No," Princess Lyra replied, shaking her head. "I am not an enemy. I am from beyond your world. I have been sent here for a purpose, and I need your help." Ethan's mind reeled. A princess from another world. He could barely process what he was hearing. Was this some kind of joke? A trick? He looked over at his comrades, still hiding behind cover, eyes wide with confusion. No one else had moved. The whole situation was too strange. He couldn't understand it. He wasn't trained for this. He wasn't prepared for aliens. "You need my help?" he asked, his voice still full of skepticism. "Why?" Princess Lyra looked at him, her large eyes shimmering in the light. "Because I am being hunted. And without you, I will not survive." There was a moment of silence, as if the air itself was holding its breath. Ethan could feel the weight of the words. They were not just words. They were a plea. And for some reason, he found himself believing her. He lowered his rifle slowly, though his heart was still racing. He didn't know why, but he knew one thing. This wasn't the kind of thing he ran away from. "All right," Ethan said finally, his voice steady despite the chaos in his head. "I'll protect you. But you need to explain exactly what's going on." Princess Lyra nodded, her eyes softening with relief. "I will. But not here. Not yet." And so, for the first time in his life, Sergeant Ethan Carter found himself standing side by side with a being from another world, a princess who needed his protection. Little did he know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would change everything he thought he knew about war, loyalty, and what it meant to be human. The wind blew gently across the abandoned industrial complex, carrying with it the scent of dust and decaying metal. Ethan was still trying to wrap his mind around what had just happened. A princess from another world. It didn't feel real. He had seen many things in his life as a soldier, but this was beyond anything he had ever imagined. Princess Lyra stood a few steps away from him, her eyes scanning the area. She had barely moved since revealing her true identity, yet there was a sense of urgency in her every motion. She didn't look like she belonged in this war-torn world. She didn't seem afraid, but there was a quiet tension in the air that made Ethan's heart race. She had been hunted, and now she was here, depending on him. "We should move," Lyra said, her voice calm but serious. "They're coming." Ethan's brow furrowed. "Who's coming?" He was already on edge, his senses heightened after everything that had happened. "They know I'm here. They've been tracking me for a long time," Lyra explained, "and they won't stop until they find me." Before Ethan could ask more questions, a distant roar echoed across the complex. It sounded like the rumble of heavy engines, but louder and more menacing. His instincts kicked in, and he crouched, looking for cover. He motioned for Lyra to follow him behind a stack of rusted crates. "Stay down," he hissed, his voice low and urgent. Lyra didn't need to be told twice. She quickly crouched beside him, her eyes glowing faintly in the dim light, scanning the distance. Ethan knew something was coming, something big, but even his seasoned military training hadn't prepared him for what happened next. A sleek black ship appeared on the horizon, low to the ground, its engines roaring as it cut through the sky. It was fast, faster than anything Ethan had seen before. It hovered above the ground with ease, making no sound at all as it descended. The craft was unlike any aircraft from Earth. Its surface was smooth, dark, and reflective, almost blending into the night sky as it approached. "That's them," Lyra said softly, her voice tight with anxiety. "They'd found me." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He instinctively reached for his rifle, but Lyra stopped him. "Don't shoot," she whispered urgently. "They're not human. They're not what you think." Ethan was confused. Who else could they be? What kind of threat was he facing now? The ship landed with a soft thud, and the air seemed to hum with the intensity of its presence. The ground trembled slightly beneath Ethan's feet as the ship powered down, and the doors on the side slowly opened. A group of figures emerged, walking with a fluid, unnerving grace. They were tall, almost unnaturally so, and their skin was a pale gray that shimmered slightly in the moonlight. Their eyes were deep black, like empty voids, and they wore armor that reflected the faint light, making them look like shadows. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. These were no ordinary soldiers. These were beings unlike anything he had seen before. "Who are they?" he whispered to Lyra, his voice trembling despite his best efforts to stay calm. "They're called the Casalcori," Lyra said in a low voice. "They are a ruthless warrior race. They've been hunting me for years. They believe I possess something that can change the balance of power in the galaxy, and they won't stop until they have it." Ethan's mind raced. "What do they want from you?" Lyra hesitated, her eyes flicking nervously to the approaching soldiers. "They want my ability," she said slowly. "It's something I was born with, something that makes me different from the rest of my people. It's powerful, and if they control it, they will become unstoppable." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. He had seen the horrors of war, but this was something far more dangerous than anything Earth had ever faced. The Casalcori soldiers continued to approach, their movements eerily synchronized. They didn't speak, but their presence was overwhelming. Ethan instinctively raised his rifle, his finger on the trigger, but Lyra grabbed his wrist before he could fire. "No," she said urgently. "You can't fight them. Not like this. You don't understand what they're capable of." Ethan's mind was spinning. He had always believed that the key to surviving a battle was firepower. Fight harder, fight smarter, and you'd win. But now, facing these alien beings, he realized that nothing he knew could prepare him for this. The Casalcori leader stepped forward. He was taller than the others, his armor decorated with intricate symbols that seemed to glow faintly. His eyes fixed on Lyra, and for a moment, the world felt still, like time itself had paused. "Princess Lyra," the leader's voice echoed, deep and chilling. "You cannot run from your fate. Surrender yourself to us, and we will spare your life. Resist, and you will be destroyed." Ethan gripped his rifle tighter, but Lyra didn't seem afraid. She met the leader's gaze, her own eyes unblinking. "You will never have me," she said, her voice calm but resolute. The leader tilted his head slightly, a cold smile playing across his lips. "You think you can stop us? You and this human? Your race is nothing. We have seen civilizations rise and fall. You are no different." Ethan felt a surge of anger. How dare they? How dare they belittle humanity like that? His fists clenched around the rifle, but he knew, deep down, that this was no ordinary enemy. No amount of rage or gunfire would stop them. Lyra stood tall, as if her very presence was defying the inevitable. "You underestimate us," she said softly, but with a fierceness that made Ethan pause. "You may have advanced technology, but you do not understand the power of humanity. We will fight for what is ours." For a brief moment, there was silence, an eerie quiet before the storm. Ethan watched as the Salcori soldiers slowly circled them, their eyes scanning every movement. He could see the way they moved, how they coordinated without a single word exchange. They weren't just soldiers, they were a single, terrifying force. Their very presence was like a pressure pushing down on him, making it hard to breathe. The Talcori leader motioned for his soldiers to halt. "We will give you one final chance," he said, his voice like ice. "Come with us, or face annihilation." Ethan's heart was hammering in his chest. He had no idea how they could fight these beings. He could already feel the weight of their power, a power that no human could ever hope to match. But Lyra didn't flinch. She didn't seem afraid. And that gave Ethan something to hold on to. He looked at her, and for the first time since the chaos began, he saw a glimmer of hope in her eyes. She wasn't backing down. She wasn't giving in. And neither was he. "We won't surrender," Lyra said firmly, her voice filled with a calm determination that Ethan admired. "Not now. Not ever." The Talcori leader studied her for a moment, then nodded to his soldiers. "So be it," he said quietly. "Prepare yourselves for the consequences." Suddenly, the air around them seemed to crackle with energy. Ethan's instincts screamed at him to run, to get away, but he couldn't. He couldn't leave Lyra. He couldn't abandon her now, not after everything they had been through. The Salcori soldiers began to move, their weapons glowing with a deadly light. Ethan raised his rifle, but he had no illusions. He couldn't win this fight. Not with just a gun. He needed something more, something he didn't have yet. But as the first blast of energy shot past him, narrowly missing his shoulder, something clicked in his mind. He wasn't alone. He was fighting for something bigger than himself now. And somehow that gave him the strength to stand tall, to face the enemy with everything he had. Lyra was right. Humanity had power. And he was about to find out just how much. The air felt thick and heavy as the first wave of Salcori soldiers advanced toward them, their glowing weapons raised. Ethan's pulse raced, his hand shaking as he tightened his grip around his rifle. He had been in dangerous situations before, but this felt different. The weight of the alien threat, the urgency in Lyra's eyes, the reality of what they were facing, it all hit him in waves. He glanced at Lyra, standing beside him, her posture calm and unflinching. Despite the grave situation, she wasn't backing down. Her face was pale, but there was a fierceness in her eyes that kept Ethan from panicking. She was different from anything he had ever encountered. She wasn't just an alien princess, she was a warrior in her own right. Ethan couldn't help but admire her strength. She didn't cower in fear. She wasn't going to give in to these enemies, no matter how powerful they were. He, on the other hand, wasn't sure how they could survive this. The odds were stacked against them. "Stay close," Lyra whispered, her voice steady. "We have to keep moving." Ethan nodded, his mind still racing. They couldn't just stand there. If they were going to survive, they had to think fast. They couldn't fight the Salcori soldiers head-on. Their weapons were far too advanced. He needed a plan, a distraction, anything to give them a chance. The Salcori leader, still hovering in the distance, raised his hand. His soldiers immediately halted, watching their every move with cold, calculating eyes. It was as if they knew they had all the time in the world. "Your resistance is futile," the leader called out. "You will surrender. You will come with us." But Lyra didn't flinch. She stepped forward, standing tall as she met his gaze. "I will never surrender," she said, her voice full of determination. "I will die before I let you control me." The Xalakori leader's lips curled into a thin smile. "So be it," he said, his voice dark and heavy with the promise of destruction. "You will perish with your human companion." Ethan's stomach twisted. His mind flashed to the battle ahead. He had no doubt that the Xalakori could destroy them in an instant. He had seen their power, their speed, their brutal efficiency. They didn't play by the same rules as humans, and he realized, in that moment, that there was no way out of this. They would fight, and they would die. "Lyra," Ethan said, his voice low but urgent, "there has to be another way. We can't beat them like this." Lyra's eyes met his, and for the first time since they met, Ethan saw something different in them. Something vulnerable. She was just as scared as he was. Maybe more so. But she didn't show it. She wasn't afraid of death. She had known it was coming for her, had known her enemies would find her sooner or later. "You don't understand, Ethan," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly now. "If they capture me, it's over for all of us. The Xalakori will enslave your people. They will destroy everything. You don't know the consequences of their power. I can't let that happen." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He had known it wasn't just about her survival, but hearing it laid out like that. He felt the weight of her words. "So what do we do?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "How do we stop them?" Lyra's gaze softened, and she shook her head. "There is no way to stop them. Not unless I make a sacrifice." Ethan frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" Lyra took a step back, her eyes never leaving his. There was a strange resolve in her expression now, something both fierce and sorrowful. "If they capture me, they'll force me to unlock the power within me. The power I was born with. That power could destroy worlds, Ethan. And once they have it, they will use it to conquer everything in their path." Ethan's heart raced. He had heard rumors of weapons that could destroy entire planets, but hearing it from Lyra made it all feel real. He was beginning to understand the gravity of the situation. If the Xalakori got their hands on her, it would be the end of everything. And it would all be because of her unique power. "I can't let that happen," Lyra continued, her voice unwavering. "But if they're going to destroy us, I'd rather do it on my terms. I won't let them control me." Ethan's stomach twisted as realization dawned. He had no idea what she was planning, but it was clear that Lyra was prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice. She wasn't just ready to die. She was ready to do something far worse, to stop the Xalakori and ensure they couldn't use her power against humanity. "You can't," Ethan said, panic rising in his chest. "There has to be another way. There must be something we can do." But Lyra only shook her head, her face full of sadness. "There is no other way, Ethan. This is the only way." Before Ethan could argue further, the Xalakori soldiers began to move again, their weapons charging with a menacing hum. The air was thick with tension. Ethan's mind raced, trying to come up with a plan, anything to stop them. But the enemy was too close now. There was no more time. "Get down," Lyra shouted suddenly, pushing Ethan to the ground. A bright, blinding beam of energy shot past them, narrowly missing Lyra. The blast hit a nearby building, sending debris flying everywhere. Ethan quickly scrambled to his feet, his rifle raised instinctively. But there was no time for a counterattack. "Run," Lyra shouted. "We have to keep moving." They sprinted, ducking behind piles of rubble, their footsteps muffled by the chaos around them. The Xalakori soldiers pursued them relentlessly, their weapons glowing brightly in the dark night. The sound of their footsteps echoed in Ethan's ears, growing louder with each passing second. Lyra was ahead of him, now, moving faster, as if she knew what was coming. Ethan's heart was pounding, and his breath came in ragged gasps. He could feel the Salcori closing in. They wouldn't stop. He had to do something. Suddenly, Lyra stopped in her tracks, turning to face him. Ethan, you need to leave. Now. Ethan skidded to a halt, confused. What? No, I'm not leaving you. But Lyra's eyes were full of determination. You have to. They're coming for me. And if you stay, I'm not leaving you. Ethan cut her off, his voice firm. We fight together, or we don't fight at all. Tears filled Lyra's eyes as she grabbed his arms. You don't understand. If you stay with me, they'll use you to get to me. They'll destroy you. Please, Ethan. I can't lose you. He shook his head, his heart breaking. I'm not leaving you, he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. Not after everything we've been through. The ground beneath them shook violently as the Talakori closed in. Ethan could hear the weapons powering up, ready to unleash their devastating firepower. They had no time left. Lyra turned to face him fully, her presence commanding. I am of a species that was once considered extinct, she explained. My people, the Lumina, were the most advanced race in the galaxy, capable of tapping into energies that can shape the very fabric of reality. We could manipulate energy, control time, and even alter the course of history itself. But when the Salcori attacked my world, they wiped out my people, leaving only a few survivors. I was one of them. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He had heard of ancient civilizations with powers beyond human understanding, but this was something else entirely. To think that Lyra, this woman, this warrior, was one of the last of such a powerful race was beyond anything he could have imagined. But why didn't you tell me before? Ethan asked, struggling to make sense of it all. Why keep this a secret? Lyra's expression softened, her eyes filled with sorrow. I had to protect you, Ethan. I had to protect the truth. If the Salcori knew I was the last of the Lumina, they would have come for me sooner. They would have destroyed Earth long ago, and they would have killed you. The power I possess is too dangerous in the wrong hands. I didn't want to risk anyone getting hurt because of me. Ethan shook his head, still trying to process everything she had just revealed. It was hard to believe, hard to accept. But the evidence was right in front of him. The way she had harnessed that power, the way the Talcori had reacted to her, it all made sense now. But you said you were the last of your kind. Ethan said, his voice trembling. What happens now? What happens to Earth? Lyra's face grew somber. The Salcori will stop at nothing to take me, Ethan. They will never stop hunting me until they control my power. But I won't let them have it. That's why I had to make the choice. The only way to stop them was to release the energy I had been keeping sealed inside me, to give them a taste of what's to come if they continued their pursuit. Ethan took a step toward her, his mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. So, what does that mean for you? For us? For Earth? Lyra's glowing eyes softened, and she took his hand. Her touch warmed despite her almost otherworldly appearance. It means that I am no longer fully Lumina. I have released all of my power, and now I'm something else. Something between human and Lumina. I can't go back to what I was. But that doesn't mean I can't still protect you. Protect Earth. Ethan felt a surge of emotion as he looked at her. Despite the incredible power she had, despite the sacrifice she had made, there was still something deeply human about Lyra. Her determination, her compassion, her strength. They were the same qualities that had drawn him to her in the first place. Even now, with everything she had revealed, she was still the woman who had fought beside him, the woman who had saved his life. But what if they find you again? Ethan asked, his voice filled with worry. What if they come for you again? Lyra's expression hardened, her eyes filled with a quiet fire. They will come. There is no doubt about that. But I am not afraid of them anymore. I've made my choice. I've embraced my power, and I will not let anyone take it from me. If the Talcori want to destroy Earth, they will have to go through me first. Ethan felt a sense of awe rising within him. This woman, This princess from another world was willing to give everything to protect Earth. She was no longer just a survivor. She was a force to be reckoned with. He had witnessed her power firsthand, and he knew she wasn't bluffing. She was ready to do whatever it took to stop the Thalkori. But despite her strength, a sinking feeling settled in his stomach. Lyra had made a sacrifice, one that she might never fully return from. She had given up everything to protect them, and now she was in danger of losing herself entirely. What happens if you can't control it? Ethan asked, his voice quiet with concern. What if you lose yourself to the power? Lyra's gaze softened, her hand tightening around his. I won't lose myself. I've made peace with who I am. But I won't let this power define me. I will fight for what's right, for what's worth saving. And if that means facing the Exalcord again, then so be it. I won't run. Not anymore. Ethan felt a surge of admiration for her. She had already sacrificed so much. She had given up everything. Her people, her old life, her very identity, just to protect the Earth and its people. It was a sacrifice beyond anything he could fully comprehend. He couldn't let it go to waste. He couldn't let her sacrifice be in vain. I'm with you, Lyra, he said, his voice firm. I'll stand by you, no matter what. We'll fight together. We'll stop the Thalkori. She smiled, a soft, bittersweet smile, and nodded. Thank you, Ethan. You don't know how much that means to me. As they stood together in the silence of the ruined battlefield, with the faint glow of Lyra's power still shimmering in the air, Ethan felt a sense of purpose rising within him. He had always fought for survival, for his country, for his comrades. But now he was fighting for something greater, for Earth, for humanity, and for the woman who had shown him that sometimes the greatest strength lay in sacrifice. Lyra had revealed the truth, and now the battle was far from over. The Thalkori would come, but they were not the only threat. There was still so much unknown, so much left to discover about Lyra's power and the depths of the ancient conflict that had brought them to this moment. Ethan knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning, and he would stand with Lyra until the end. The air was quiet now. The chaos of the battle had faded, leaving behind only the heavy silence that seemed to hang over everything. Ethan stood amidst the ruins, his mind still trying to catch up with the events that had unfolded in such a short amount of time. He had witnessed the impossible, Lyra unleashing unimaginable power, the destruction of the Thalkori soldiers, and the revelation of Lyra's true nature. But even now, standing in the aftermath, it all felt like a blur. His thoughts drifted to Lyra. She had changed, and he couldn't stop thinking about what she had done. The power she had unleashed had been incredible. He had felt it, the raw energy that seemed to pulse through the ground beneath his feet. It had been both awe-inspiring and terrifying. But now, she wasn't the same. She wasn't just an alien princess. She was something else entirely. A being caught between worlds. And that terrified him. He looked around at the destruction. The Thalkori were gone. The battlefield was littered with the remains of their soldiers, their weapons destroyed by the sheer force of Lyra's power. The city, once bustling with life, now lay in ruins. Buildings that had once stood tall and proud were nothing more than crumbled heaps of stone and metal. The night sky above them was eerily calm, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Ethan. His heart skipped a beat as he heard her voice. He turned, his gaze searching for Lyra, and found her standing a few feet away. She had moved without him noticing, her glowing figure now dimming as she approached him. Her once vibrant energy seemed to have faded, leaving her looking more fragile than before. The power she had released had taken its toll on her. Her movements were slower, her steps more deliberate, as if every motion required effort. Lyra, Ethan said, rushing to her side. He could see the strain on her face, the exhaustion in her eyes. Are you okay? She gave him a small, tired smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. I'm still here, she said softly, but I'm not sure how much longer I can keep this up. Ethan's heart sank as he looked at her. The weight of what she had done, what she had sacrificed, was evident. The energy she had used to destroy the Exalicordi and protect Earth had drained her. Her body, still glowing faintly, seemed fragile now, like it was on the brink of collapse. And the fact that she had given everything to protect him and the world only made the situation worse. He couldn't let her suffer like this. "Lyra, you need to rest," Ethan said, his voice full of concern. "You're not going to be able to keep going like this. Please, let me help you." She shook her head, her expression distant. "I don't know if I can rest, Ethan. The energy I unleashed, it's not something I can just recover from. I've given everything I have." Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder, trying to offer some comfort. He could feel the heat of her power still radiating beneath her skin, but it was growing weaker by the second. She had been right. This wasn't just about exhaustion. It was something deeper, something that couldn't be healed easily. "You've done enough," Ethan said firmly. "You've already given more than anyone could ask for. Now it's my turn. Let me take care of you." Lyra looked at him, her eyes softening, and for the first time since he had met her, he saw vulnerability in her gaze. She had always been strong, always so composed and determined. But now she looked human again. Frail, delicate, like she could shatter at any moment. "I didn't want this, Ethan," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I didn't want to be the one to carry all of this. But now, I don't know how to fix it, how to go back." Ethan pulled her gently into a hug, trying to offer her some comfort in the only way he knew how. He didn't have all the answers. He didn't know how to fix what had happened. But he knew one thing: he wasn't going to leave her. He couldn't. "We'll figure it out together," Ethan said softly. "You don't have to carry this burden alone." Lyra clung to him for a moment, her body trembling. Ethan could feel the weight of her exhaustion in the way she leaned against him. It was clear that she needed rest, needed time to recover, but there was no time to waste. The Exalicordi would regroup. They would return. "Lyra," Ethan said, pulling back slightly to look her in the eyes. "We can't stop here. We need to make sure they don't come back, that they don't destroy everything you fought for. We can't let your sacrifice be in vain." Lyra nodded slowly, though she looked uncertain. "I know, but I'm not sure what I have left to give. I've already pushed myself to the limit." Ethan's mind raced as he tried to think of a solution. There had to be a way to help her recover. Maybe there was a way to tap into her power without overloading her. Maybe they could find someone who could help her heal, someone who understood what she had become. "Let's go back to the underground facility," Ethan suggested, his voice growing more confident. "We can find answers there. Maybe there's something in the research that can help. We can't waste any more time." Lyra hesitated but then nodded. "You're right. We have to keep moving." Together, they started walking through the ruins, carefully picking their way through the debris. The world around them was eerily silent, but the weight of what they had just faced still hung heavily in the air. The Exalicordi were gone, but the fear of their return still loomed over them. Lyra's power was fading, and with it, her ability to protect herself and the world. As they made their way toward the underground facility, Ethan couldn't help but wonder how much time they had left. How long would it take for Lyra to recover? And what if they couldn't find a solution in time? The thought of losing her, after everything they had been through, made his chest tighten. They reached the facility just as the sun began to rise, casting a faint light over the ruined city. The entrance to the underground base was still intact, the heavy metal doors standing tall against the destruction above ground. Ethan pushed them open, and they descended into the darkness below. Inside, the facility was cold, the lights flickering as they walked through the hallways. It felt empty, lifeless, as if the people who had once worked here had long since vanished. The hum of the machinery and the low whirring of computers were the only sounds that filled the air. It was a stark contrast to the chaos they had just left behind. Ethan guided Lyra through the facility, his eyes scanning every corner for something that could help. They reached a large sterile room with a series of monitors and medical equipment. Lyra collapsed onto one of the tables, her breathing shallow. "Just stay here," Ethan said, trying to sound calm even though panic was rising inside him. "I'll find something. There has to be something here that can help." He moved quickly, checking the medical files and looking for anything related to Lyra's species or her power. But the more he searched, the more he realized how little they knew about her true nature. There were no records, no information about the Lumina or their abilities. The Salcori had erased every trace of them from the records. "Ethan," Lyra's voice called out weakly, pulling him from his thoughts. He rushed to her side, his heart racing. "What is it? Are you okay?" She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of pain and fear. "I don't know how much longer I can hold on. I feel like I'm fading." Ethan gripped her hand, desperation filling his chest. He had to find something. He had to save her. Then, as if by some miracle, a message popped up on one of the monitors. It was an old file, hidden deep within the system. The title read, "The Lumina Recovery Process." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He quickly opened the file, hoping it held the key to saving Lyra. The document explained the recovery process for the Lumina, describing how they could restore their energy after exhausting their powers. It mentioned a specific type of crystal, known as the stellar heart, which could absorb and stabilize the energy of a Lumina. If they could find this crystal, it might be the key to restoring Lyra's strength. Ethan rushed back to Lyra's side, his mind racing. "Lyra, there's a chance. We can find this crystal, the stellar heart. It might be able to help you recover." Her eyes flickered with a hint of hope. "Where can we find it?" Ethan looked at the map on the screen. "It's not far. We have to hurry." He helped her to her feet, and together, they set out once more, hoping that this last chance would be enough to save her. The journey ahead was uncertain, and every step felt heavier than the last. Lyra had managed to gather just enough strength to follow Ethan, though her movements were slow and deliberate. Each step seemed to take everything out of her, and her breathing grew labored with each passing moment. Ethan could see the strain on her face, but her resolve remained unbroken. Even in her weakened state, she was determined to keep going. It wasn't just about her survival anymore. It was about saving the future. And that was something Ethan couldn't let her do alone. They moved quickly through the abandoned corridors of the underground facility. The light from their flashlights bounced off the cold, steel walls, casting eerie shadows that made the place feel even more desolate. The hum of the generators echoed through the empty halls, their only source of power in this dark, forgotten place. Ethan's mind raced as he tried to think of a plan. They had no time to waste. The Salcori could return at any moment, and if they didn't get Lyra the recovery crystal, she might never recover. As they reached the map room, the sense of urgency became even more pronounced. The stellar heart crystal wasn't far, but it was hidden deep within an ancient facility. The map showed a route leading to a remote location, a cave system in the mountains outside the city. According to the data, this cave contained a vault where the stellar heart was kept. It was their only hope. Ethan turned to Lyra, who was leaning against a wall, trying to catch her breath. "We can do this, Lyra," he said, his voice firm. "You've already done so much. Now it's my turn to help you. We'll get you that crystal." Lyra looked up at him, her glowing eyes filled with both gratitude and concern. "I'm not sure how much longer I can last, Ethan. I feel weaker with each step, but I can't stop now. I have to keep going." Ethan nodded. He understood. She had already sacrificed so much. She had given everything to protect him and the earth, and now it was his turn to fight for her. He wasn't going to let her fall. "We'll make it," Ethan said confidently, though doubt crept into his mind. The path ahead was dangerous. The Salcori weren't the only threat. The caves were rumored to be filled with traps, obstacles, and even wild creatures that had made the mountain their home. but there was no choice. If they didn't find the stellar heart, there was no telling what would happen to Lyra. She had already warned him that if she couldn't control her power, she might lose herself entirely, and Ethan wasn't willing to let that happen. They exited the underground facility, stepping out into the cool night air. The stars above seemed to twinkle in the vast sky, but there was no time to admire their beauty. The path to the mountains was long and treacherous, but they had no other choice. As they made their way out of the city and toward the mountains, Ethan kept a close eye on Lyra. Her condition was worsening, but she refused to let him help her. She insisted on walking on her own, though her movements were becoming increasingly erratic. Each step seemed to take more effort than the last, and she stumbled more than once, causing Ethan's heart to race with worry. "Lyra, you need to rest," Ethan said, his voice full of concern. "We can't keep going like this." She shook her head, determination in her eyes. "I can't rest yet, Ethan. Not until we get the crystal. It's the only way. I don't have much time." Ethan felt a wave of guilt wash over him. He wanted to help her, to take the burden off her shoulders, but she had made up her mind. She wasn't going to stop until they reached the cave, no matter how much it cost her. They pushed on through the night, and by the time the first light of dawn appeared on the horizon, they had reached the base of the mountains. The towering peaks loomed above them, their jagged edges cutting into the sky. The entrance to the cave system was hidden behind a thick wall of foliage, making it almost impossible to find unless you knew exactly where to look. Ethan helped Lyra through the dense underbrush, his heart pounding as they approached the cave. He couldn't help but feel that time was running out. The longer they waited, the more Lyra's energy drained, and he couldn't bear the thought of losing her. Not after everything they had been through. As they entered the cave, the temperature dropped sharply and the air grew damp. The walls of the cave were covered in thick moss and lichen, and the sound of dripping water echoed off the stone. Ethan could feel the weight of the place. There was something ancient about it, something that made him uneasy. "We're close," Lyra whispered, her voice barely audible. "The vault is just ahead, but it won't be easy to reach." Ethan nodded, trying to keep his fear in check. He had no idea what kind of traps or dangers awaited them, but he knew they couldn't afford to fail. The fate of Lyra, and perhaps the entire planet, rested on their success. As they moved deeper into the cave, the darkness seemed to close in around them. The path became narrow and winding, forcing them to move carefully. The cave was full of strange markings, ancient symbols that none of them could decipher. The walls seemed to shift as they walked, creating a maze of twisting corridors that made it nearly impossible to know which way to go. Lyra's breathing became more labored, and her steps grew weaker. Ethan could see the strain on her face, and it made his heart ache. She was running out of time, and they still had so far to go. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "Don't let me fail." "You won't fail," Ethan said, his voice firm. "I'm right here with you. We're in this together." They rounded a corner, and suddenly, the cave opened up into a vast chamber. In the center of the room was a pedestal, and on it sat a crystal, glowing softly, radiating an otherworldly light. The stellar heart. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. They had found it. But before they could move any closer, the ground beneath them began to shake. A deep rumble echoed through the cave, and the walls seemed to tremble. Ethan's heart raced as he looked around, trying to understand what was happening. "Get back," Lyra gasped, pushing him away. Ethan turned to see a massive, shadowy figure emerging from the darkness. It was an ancient guardian, a creature designed to protect the crystal from any who dared to enter. Its glowing eyes locked onto them, and a deep growl rumbled from its throat. "You need to leave now," Lyra shouted, her energy flickering. Ethan wasn't sure what to do. He wanted to protect Lyra, but she was already so weak. He couldn't let the guardian hurt her. "We'll fight it together," Ethan said, pulling out a weapon from his belt, but Lyra stopped him with a sharp look. "No," she said, shaking her head. I can't. You need to take the crystal. Ethan's heart twisted with worry. Lyra, no. You have to do it, she said, her voice desperate. You have to take the crystal and use it to heal me. You're the only one who can. Ethan hesitated, looking at her one last time. She was willing to sacrifice everything for this mission. He knew what he had to do. With one final glance at Lyra, Ethan ran toward the pedestal. The Guardian roared, but he ignored it. The crystal was their only hope. He reached the pedestal, grabbed the stellar heart, and felt its power surge through him. He could feel the energy flooding into him, but it wasn't for him. It was for Lyra. He rushed back to her side, the crystal glowing brightly in his hands. He placed it gently on her chest, and the energy began to transfer, slowly healing her body. The Guardian let out a frustrated howl, but it was too late. The power of the crystal enveloped Lyra, and her energy began to stabilize. Her glow returned, brighter than ever. Ethan watched in awe as the transformation took place. Lyra was healing. She was going to be okay. And together, they had a future.